Perfect. Here we go. So today we're going to talk about the Napoleonic era, the buildup, and the aftermath. So we'll talk about the French Revolution and how that led to the rise of Napoleon. Then we're going to talk about the actual rise of Napoleon. We're going to talk about what he did when he was in power, how he fell because of certain decisions he made, and then the Congress of Vienna, which was really the end of everything Napoleon, besides his long-lasting impact, of course. So the French Revolution was started because of poor harvest, financial crisis, and unfair taxation. It was really just not a great situation to be in for the third estate of France, as bread was very scarce and costed a lot of money. This was stemming from a 2-decade poor harvest because of environmental conditions, and the government, on top of that, wasn't really managing their money well after poor military tactics where they were very over-aggressive in certain situations. So this prompted the calling of the Estates General, and eventually the Third Estate was actually locked out of the meeting for the Estates General. So they went to a tennis court, believe it or not, and they wrote up a constitution that wasn't necessarily implemented, but they decided that they wanted a constitution. They decided everything they wanted to stand for, and then this led. This was kind of like the moderate phase, and then it went more extreme and extreme. It led to like the Louis XVI execution, the Reign of Terror, where thousands have died because of riots and strikes and protests. It was not. It was definitely not peaceful protesting of any measure. The effects of this gave way for someone like Napoleon to gain power. Even though there was a 5-year transition period between the end of the French Revolution and Napoleon's actual official emperor reign. But this also gave courage to other European nations, and even in the Americas and in Africa, just everywhere. It showed people that you can actually revolt against a power. Which really, it just started a whole hotspot of it. If you go back and you look in the 1800s, that's when a lot of the revolutions started back up. This was also exacerbated by nationalism from the Congress of Vienna, but I'll get to that later. And then another effect was the Declaration of the Rights of Man. So the rise of Napoleon. Napoleon was officially a military general, and he rose through the military ranks. He led conquests, I'd say, in like 1795, around there. He was even doing really well in conquests of Syria, which were under the Ottoman Empire at that time. Which it wasn't like he was attacking some weak little thing. You know, it's the Ottoman Empire. I mean, I know that they weren't the most powerful empire at this stage, but it wasn't like he's going against some random African nation that you can just savage with like a little sword, right? Like, he also left. Eventually after the French Revolution, he left the army for a role in the French government because he saw an opportunity that he could potentially rise all the way to power, and he just kept working his way up. He was eventually crowned emperor in 1804 by himself, and he was kind of justified by everyone around him because everyone saw how genius he was as a military general. So during his actual rule, he established the Napoleonic Code, which actually still affects the legal system to this day. It gave jobs to the most qualified. He didn't really believe in getting certain privileges based on your birth. Like, his government officials weren't. He kind of abolished the aristocracy, and his government officials were more of qualified candidates than they were. Well, my son just came in and he was part of the aristocracy, so he has to be a government official. And he also, in line with the other enlightened rulers of the time, he supported fair trial and religious tolerance. They kind of go hand in hand in this, because if you don't have religious tolerance and you're doing a trial, let's say that you're Christian and the person you're trying is Muslim, they had some animosity back then, so it probably wouldn't be the fairest of trials. So he ensured that there was a fair trial and no religious bias. I mean, it wasn't very successful, obviously, but in today's world, it's more successful than it was back then. But it was a great start to modern legal systems in France. And the main point of his rule was his military aggression. He led the continental system against Europe, which was pretty much blockades. They were trying blockades like for ships and shipping, and he pretty much just wanted to go to economic warfare against Britain so that he could try to shift the balance of power in favor of France. He was successful as he defeated the Austrians in 2 battles, forcing them to sign treaties, I think at least one of the times. And eventually, later in his rule, he became desperate, so he had to reestablish the aristocracy to continue his military aggression. So the fall of Napoleon. This started, I'd say, at around 1812 when he went to war against Russia. So he tried to invade, but Russia, as everyone knows, is big and cold, and 600,000 people died because his strategy to make it to Moscow and St. Petersburg and all that and capture the cities, well, it didn't really work out great because I think he started somewhere in spring, but the war was clearly going to last till winter. And when it's winter, Russia never loses, unless you're the Mongols. But Russia never loses in the winter because it is so freaking cold. So what ended up happening is tens of thousands of horses died, 600,000 soldiers died, because Russia just kept retreating and retreating. And, Russia's so damn big that they couldn't do anything about it. So, and then once he tried to recall the soldiers back, Napoleon, once he tried to recall the soldiers back, it was too late, and only, I think, 10,000 survived out of the 600,000 he sent out. So that kind of, weakened his genius military general status. And he lost a war against Russia, obviously. So he was eventually exiled and forced out of power, and he was put on a Mediterranean island, which he eventually escaped and came back to France to try to one last ditch attempt at power, but he lost to the British in less than a year after he came back to power, and he eventually abdicated his power and was sent to another island called St. Helena, where he eventually died in 1821. In 1815, this kind of led to the Congress of Vienna. The downfalls of the Congress of Vienna, especially the French, where a lot of their land was seized and their power was decreased tremendously. And the Holy Roman Empire, which was already weak at the time, was officially dissolved. Nationalism at this time also increased a lot, especially in Germany and Italy, which you'll see about 50 or 60 years later. They both go into unification movements, and they eventually do. So, I mean, this is kind of showing the starting point of this and like how it builds up eventually to there, so you can use that in a continuity or change in continuity and like progress over time for your LEQ or DBQ, depending on what we do for the AP exam, because I don't think anyone knows. And then as far as revolutions go, revolutions, especially Spanish colonies revolted a lot against this, like such as Haiti and all them. They also increased nationalism similarly to Germany and Italy, and this led to many revolutions against the European colonies who were eventually, going over there during the age of exploration and exploiting them. They finally got their revenge. And Britain and Prussia, who were on the winning side of most of the French wars, increased their power through the Congress of Vienna. If you have any questions, just let me know. I don't know if Mr. Jameson will post this or not, but if he does, just let me know if you have any questions on Napoleon, and I thank you for your time.